What if you could challenge an entire belief system not with statements, but just with questions? Today, we're going to take a look inside 360 Questions to Ask a Hebrew Israelite by Dr. Malachi Z. York. Now, our goal here isn't to debate or take sides. It's simply to break down the book's arguments neutrally, using its own words to understand its pretty unique and provocative perspective.
So, right off the bat, let's be clear. This is not a gentle inquiry. This is an aggressive, confrontational book. It's specifically designed to challenge the doctrines of the Hebrew Israelites, a group who believe that certain people of color are the true descendants of the biblical Israelites. And it does this by just firing off a whole series of direct, tough questions. This style of argument, by the way, has a name. It's called a polemic.
And the author doesn't hide this confrontational goal at all. It's crystal clear right from the introduction. This quote pretty much sets the stage for the whole book. He's essentially throwing down a gauntlet, framing the text as a kind of truth test. The idea is, if your beliefs are true, you should be able to answer these questions.
So, what's the game plan here? Well, the book's strategy is to give the reader a very specific kind of ammunition. Questions. But these aren't just any questions. They're designed to force you to re-examine everything you thought you knew by going back to what the author claims are the original languages and historical contexts.
Okay, so I used that word polemic a second ago. Let's just formally define it. A polemic is not a dialogue. It's not a discussion. It's an attack. The book is really a one-sided argument aimed at deconstructing a belief system from the outside. And knowing that really helps you understand the tone and the intent behind every single question in it.
The first line of attack is all about language. The author's argument is that if you can change the meaning of the most basic foundational words in a religion, the whole structure that's built on top of them just becomes unstable. So let's see how this actually works.
The deconstruction kicks off with one of the biggest identity markers in the whole text. The author asks a really simple question to challenge the very definition of what it even means to be a Hebrew.
And this is a perfect illustration of his method. On one side, you've got the mainstream view, Hebrew is an ethnicity, a people, but the author says, no, that's not right. He argues it comes from the root word aber, which means to cross over. Therefore, he says, Hebrew isn't a race of people, it's a title. It's like being called a pioneer or a traveler because you crossed over a boundary, like Abraham crossing the river.
He then applies that exact same linguistic scalpel to another cornerstone word. What exactly is Israel? Is it a nation? A land? A people? Well, according to this book, it's none of the above.
So, the crucial point here is the reframing. The book argues that Israel isn't the name of a place or a people, but that it actually describes a single event, that time Jacob wrestled with a messenger. It was a description of an incident. The author claims that it was only much, much later that people started misapplying that term to a whole group of people.
Okay, now we get to one of the most radical redefinitions in the entire book. This one questions the very nature of God as depicted in the earliest scriptures.
This is absolutely central to the author's entire thesis. He argues that the word Elohim, which is usually translated as a singular God, is grammatically plural. He claims it actually means these beings, and that it refers to a group of physical entities known in Sumerian texts as the Anunnaki. I mean, think about it. That one change completely flips the entire story of creation on its head.
All right, so after deconstructing the words, the author turns his attention to the actions, the rituals. He applies that same critical lens to some very foundational religious practices, arguing that they might not be as ancient as people think.
Take, for example, the practice of praying at the Wailing Wall. The author questions this directly. He asks, where in the Torah does it say you have to do this? He frames this deeply important ritual not as some ancient requirement, but as a much later innovation or a tradition of men.
Now this is really interesting. This is the evidence presented for cultural borrowing. The author argues the modern Hebrew calendar isn't the original one, and by placing the Hebrew and Babylonian month names side by side, he makes a pretty powerful visual argument that the calendar was adopted during the Babylonian exile. I mean, just look at the similarities in the names.
So after all this tearing down, what does the author build in its place? This is where the book lays out its alternate history of the ancient world, a whole new narrative that he says is pieced together from what he calls the right translation of multiple ancient texts.
The foundation for this new narrative is found right here on cuneiform tablets. The author's claim is that the stories in the Bible aren't unique revelations. He says they're actually derived from much older Sumerian and Akkadian myths, like the creation story known as the Enuma Elish.
And this brings us right back to the Anunnaki. In this worldview, the Elohim are these physical beings. The book of Genesis gets reinterpreted as the story of them arriving on a planet that was already here and basically reconstructing its environment. And those angelic beings, they're not spiritual. They're just descendants of these original visitors.
To support his historical arguments, the author also draws these direct visual parallels between different cultures. Here, he points to the cube shape of the Jewish temple's Holy of Holies and the cube shape of the Islamic Kaaba. He argues their similarities in shape and ritual function, well, that's no coincidence. To him, it's evidence of a shared, much older origin.
So how does the author possibly justify such a radical reinterpretation of, well, everything? It all comes down to one single powerful tool, what he calls right translation.
We all know this verse. It's got to be one of the most famous lines ever written. It's simple, it's poetic, and it's the bedrock for multiple world religions.
But, according to the author, that simple version is just plain wrong, a mistranslation. Instead, he presents this, his right translation, breaking the verse down word by word into what he says is its original Aramaic and Hebrew meaning. And as you can see, it's a lot more complex.
Let's just put them side by side. The difference is absolutely staggering. The familiar, in the beginning God created, becomes this very scientific-sounding statement about these beings reconstructing the planet's two skies and surface. This single comparison really captures the book's entire argument in a nutshell.
And that is the ultimate takeaway here. The book's whole position is that centuries of interpretation and translation have basically hidden the original meaning of these sacred texts. The only way to find the truth, according to the author, is to throw all that away and retranslate everything from square one.
And you know, that leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought. Whether you agree with the author's conclusions or not, the book really forces you to ask, how much of any belief system is built not on the original words themselves, but on the huge, complex, and often invisible scaffolding of translation and interpretation that's been built up over millennia?